Yeah, so I think we can start officially.
We just slowly start.
Yeah. People are still joining, but so let's make a short introduction. So yeah, officially, hello everyone. Good morning, good evening, or
good afternoon.
Good afternoon, whatever you come from. So we are here live at Admind. We are live from Krakow here and from Netherlands. Before we start, let's please write in the chat box if you can hear us well. All right, please do it. And first of all, many thanks for being with us today. Thanks that you decided to spend this almost 40 minutes with us and with Marie and with Ivan. So we welcome back to our webinar series, and it's great to be here again. We couldn't wait to make another session. We started this series just at the beginning of pandemic, and since March 2020 we organized 15 such events, and we had a great opportunity to meet great designers, and today we have another one. And as you all know, our today's guest is Marie van Driessche. Sorry,
sorry for destroying your name.
Sorry about that.
Marie, that's okay. Yeah. I don't mind. I don't hear it anyway, so that's fine.
Right. So Marie is an interaction designer at VPRO, and today she's going to tell us more about inclusive design and about the role of UX design, especially when you're designing for people with some disabilities, with some hearing problems, or just for deaf people. But before we start, and before Marie introduce herself, we will make some short introduction about Admind, about our agency, because we know that there are many new joiners, many new viewers.
Yeah, so for all the new joiners, we are Admind. We are proudly call ourselves the biggest branding agency in Poland. We have offices, 6 offices in 5 different countries, with over 120 creative experts in many different fields, including, of course, branding, and we are helping with our skills to the biggest corporation globally. You can check out our portfolio on admindagency.com. And just to all the designers out there, we are hiring more than 20 open positions on our website right now. So take a look. Maybe we are looking for your talent, and you can join us from your city, because right now we are a remote first company, so you can join us from wherever you are living, wherever you are enjoying. We are really happy to talk about inclusive design. More and more we are meeting this inclusion topic in our daily work, working on the accessibility of some documents. And today we are proud to host Marie on our webinar, and I think we can give voice to her.
Yeah. Yeah, but just before start, please remember that you can ask questions. Just write it in the chat box, and after this presentation there will be a short Q&A session. Yes, so we can officially start. Marie, the floor is yours.
Okay, hello. Thank you for the introduction. I just wanted to make a remark. I have a keynote presentation. I can't see a lot because Zoom overrules the presentation. So if you have a question or you want to say something in between, you just have to let me know, or our moderators. So just to introduce myself, my name is Marie. And Admind Agency has asked me to come and tell you something about inclusive design, which I would love to do. My presentation will be 30-40 minutes, as already mentioned, and then we'll have a Q&A. And I will start. As I said, my name is Marie van Driessche, so that's my last name. And I work as an interactive designer at the VPRO, which is a public broadcasting company in the Netherlands. It's based in Hilversum. I'm an interaction designer, but I also focus on web accessibility because there's a lot of work there as well. There's a lot of attention directed to web accessibility as well these days. And if I look at our products within our company, they have to be accessible. And as you can see, I am signing for the people that can see me. That means I'm deaf. The voice that you hear is our interpreters, and she translates everything or interprets everything from Dutch Sign Language, which I speak, into English. I use the services of interpreters at many different occasions, like presentations like today, meetings at work. If I go to the doctor, I can make use of the interpreter services, and they're paid by our government. So I would like to tell you something about how you can design better for deaf people. And if you do that, other people will benefit from that too. And I have a, yeah, let's see if it works. Yes, it does. I wanted to tell you a story about the GDPR, you know, the data protection regulations in the Netherlands. Before the pandemic, I would travel with the train to my work via the Dutch railways, the Nederlandse spoorwegen, and I had a subscription. And I wanted to change the subscription, and it took me a long time to get that done via email, so I thought I'd call them, which I did via the interpreting services. There's an app we have in the Netherlands that you can call the interpreter service, and then and then you can have a phone conversation. But they said, because of the GDPR, I had to give consent for the conversation because of the data they were collecting about me. So they asked me that, interpreted the question, and I signed yes, that's no problem to me. And then the lady on the phone said, no, you have to say it. And I said, I just said yes, I signed yes, I say yes, I give my consent. That's what I signed in my own language. And she said, no, you have to say it yourself. And so we had this discussion about, but I am saying this myself. And then she said, I want to hear your voice. And that was a little bit strange to me. So why would you have to, you know, why would the one language be more important than the other? Why can't I say yes in my own language, but do I have to say it in your language? So this to me, sorry, we're having a little bit of a connection issue. Sorry, we're having a technical issue with the connection. But for me, that felt weird that I had to use a voice, my voice, to say something. So why would the voice of the interpreter not be okay? That was interesting to me. And many agencies or organizations or bodies work that way. They don't accept conversation or communication via interpreters. So that's something that, you know, I am confronted with on a daily basis. So when you look at deaf people, there is deaf with the lower cap D, which means, well, there are two perspectives on being deaf. So there's a lower caps and there's a uppercase D. So the lowercase is used to describe someone who has a hearing problem, and the uppercase is used to people who identify themselves as culturally deaf and who have a strong deaf interpreter of a deaf identity. And there's some debate about this division within the community, if we do a capital D or a smaller d. For us, the most important thing is the access to language. So I have to be a little bit careful with this division because it might change. But the thing is, lots and lots of deaf people identify themselves as being culturally deaf. They have a native language. For me, that is Dutch Sign Language. And they are a cultural community. On the topic of sign languages are different languages. And as I just said, many deaf people identify themselves as culturally deaf. That means they have their own language and the language that they grew up with. But I just wanted to make sure that you understand that it's not a simple gestural code, and sign languages are also not based on spoken languages. They have their own form, they have their own grammar. They are a visual spatial language. And they don't have written forms as well, because movement is very difficult to write down. What is important is facial expressions to give emphasis and to give meaning to an utterance. So it's actually a 4D language. We use space, facial expressions, and there's also timelines that are used. And I get this question regularly: is sign language universal? No, it's not. As well as there are many spoken languages, there are also many sign language. Every country has their own sign language. Like in Poland, there's Polish sign language, and there are other sign languages in other countries. And there are also dialects within those sign languages. So please remember that many deaf people learn the written language or the dominant language of their country as their second language, which means that you can compare deaf people in terms of reading and writing as second language learners. Many deaf people identify as being part of deaf culture and don't see themselves as someone who has a disability. So the dominant language of the people that are surrounding the deaf person, the hearing people, so the written and the written language of the country, in my case, Dutch, is not my first language. The Dutch Sign Language is my first language. And that is sometimes a problem because we speak different languages. So the hearing community and the disabled community, that is something that we kind of fall in between. So we don't need physical adaptations, but we need cultural and linguistic adaptations to be able to participate. So when we talk about language, lots of people think that deaf people can read and write. So what's the problem? And what I just said, yeah, Dutch Sign Language is not the same as written Dutch, but this goes for all sign languages and all spoken languages or all written languages. So Polish Sign Language is not the same as Polish or spoken Polish. So I want to try to explain to you what the difference is between a spoken and a signed language. So for example, this is a proper English sentence, like, would you like to have lunch with me, right? If I was to sign that, this would be you, me, lunch, go. And the second sentence is, the yellow ball is in the cupboard. In a sign language, you would say the cupboard is over there. The ball that's yellow is inside it, pointing to the cupboard. So it's localized. This doesn't mean that the grammar of sign languages is simplified. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that the grammar of like Polish is different from Dutch. It just means that grammars are different. So another issue that we have to deal with is that deaf people are, relatively small group, but very diverse. There are lots of deaf people that are born with additional disabilities, like, for instance, learning problems or cognitive issues, cognitive development issues. So that's the first group. And the second group that have the language of the country, the spoken language, as a second language. So the native language is their own signed language. And then there's at the top, there's a smaller group. It's a relatively very small group that speak like English Sign Language or British Sign Language and English equally well. And that goes for all countries and all sign languages and all spoken languages. What I just said, it's important to identify the problem, because only then you can recognize exclusion, and only from there you can start inclusive design. So the whole idea of one size fits all doesn't really work. It doesn't really work anywhere. It just doesn't ever work. So I have some tips for you to use, and if you do that, not only deaf people will benefit, but a lot of other people will benefit from it as well. So I said something about differences in languages, right? In language, in being able to master a language. If you write for the web, people will benefit from it generally. So if you use this, deaf people will profit from it, but also other people like these. 1 in 6 adults have difficulty in reading, writing, and or calculating. So for the UK, for the US, for many other countries, it's similar. So there are people who drop out of formal education, for example. They have all kinds of challenges like learning disabilities, dyslexia, or learning problems in general, or they just haven't found an environment that meets their needs. This is even more so the case for deaf people. Some people even say that it's 70% that have issues with reading. So they leave, for these people, they have issues with understanding the content, the implicit content and interpreting it. Yeah, and that's what happens when the written language is not your first language. So these are some tips about readability that you can apply. So use headings and subheadings. Make 1 point per paragraph. Use short sentences, 7 to 10 words per line. Use bulleted lists. Use easy, accessible language whenever possible. Write in a journalistic style. Make your point and then explain it. Write in an active form. Avoid unnecessary jargon and slang, which can increase the user's cognitive load. And then use images, diagrams, multimedia for a visual translation of the content. Chunk your content. Use white space. And if there are specific words that you have to use a glossary for specialized vocabulary and provide definitions in a simpler language. Reading is effort for many people, not just for deaf people. Reading just means it takes effort. And in the case of websites, of web pages, people read those differently than they do a page in a book. So they scan it. But if you go to a website, you don't necessarily feel like reading. You scan it because you're there to perform a task. And this is a very important topic, subtitles or captions. I just wanted to explain the difference between subtitles and closed captions. What subtitles do is they just give you the dialogue. And also mostly with different languages, for example. So that's subtitles. So if you have a program in the Netherlands in a different language, so people can hear it, don't understand the language, they can read what's being said. Closed captions are focused on, additionally, the interpretation of sound. So important sounds in the environment are added to the captions. And that works really, really well. It's an ideal solution for me. It makes things accessible. But I love to read. So that means that for me, closed captions or reading are not an issue. But for many deaf people, it is an issue because they go really fast. They can't read everything. It's not their first language. Jokes with words, wordplay, synonyms, all kinds of language jokes are missed because they're difficult. As I said, sign languages don't have a written form. So if you use captions, then you get a translation in a written form in another language, while you yourself don't have a written form for your own language. So that makes it a little bit complicated. But in general, subtitles work well. Yes, closed captions work well. And they work well because of this. Closed captions or subtitles have been invented for deaf and hearing people, or deaf and hard of hearing people, but now they're used by everybody. So 80% of videos are being watched without sound. And most of them which are watched until the end, have subtitles. If they don't have subtitles, people don't watch them until the end. And there are many advantages to closed captioning. As I said, there's many people who benefit from this, videos without sound, but also if you don't speak the language, English, for example, and it's your second language, then it's easier to have captions accompanying the video. And this is kind of like logical, right? Because when you're on the train, or it's quiet somewhere, or you've forgotten your headset, then you could still watch a clip if it's subtitled. And it's very good for the SEO. What's important is that you have to add the file separately. So not hard-coded, not burnt in. But if you do it separately, then it boosts the SEO. And then you have a higher place in the list. So the goal of subtitles is to translate information, and it doesn't have to be word for word, very precise. And it's also not meant to test the language knowledge of your audience. The sole purpose is to convey information. So what we see now is more and more use of transcripts. because for me that worked really well. It makes podcasts, for example, accessible to me, and I like reading, but for many deaf people this is very difficult. It's such a long read, and very difficult to interpret also, and also it has like ers and arms and all these kinds of fillers that make it really difficult to read. I would suggest to do it not just for deaf people, but also for people who are hard of hearing. I think it would help a lot of people, and yet again, it's good for the SEO. The best option in this sense is a multimedia solution. If you want to be 100% accessible, including deaf people, then you have to add clips in the sign language, but done by a native signer who can translate text into the sign language that you need. It's important that this is a deaf person and not an interpreter. And this way you make the information 100% accessible, but it's very costly. It takes money, it takes time. You have to make the recording. And if something changes in the information, you have to redo the whole recording again. For me personally, I'm not too okay. It's okay for me, but it's not the best solution for me because I'm okay with reading, but a lot of deaf people appreciate it very much. And it's a very good solution for specific information. If it's about taxes, if it's about political information, legal terminology, for example. And as, for example, the the COVID pandemic information, it's very important to have that information conveyed as well. If people don't understand the texts, the written information that's being shared with people, then a signed version helps a lot. So in 2020, last year, there were elections in the United States, and they have taken it upon themselves to include deaf people more and more in political debates and things related to these elections. So they have made everything accessible in American Sign Language. They wanted everybody to be part of the process and be able to participate. So it's a very good example. Another good example is from the Netherlands. One of the cities in the Netherlands is Utrecht. So the city itself took it upon themselves. They took the responsibility to give access in sign language. So you can see the blue square in the left corner. They say, if you want to get in touch with us, you can call us via this teletalk agency, interpreter agency. So that means you don't have to go to the agency yourself, but you can just call them directly, and then they will go to the agency. It happens in other countries as well. In France, this happens a lot. There's a service that's being provided. So these are institutions that work with interpreter companies to provide this access. So it's very good if you can talk to someone in your native language, right? Because that's the way you can express yourself the best, rather than trying to understand what's being written, trying to understand what people are saying. What's important is this. If you talking about contact options, sometimes they're obligatory, but I think it's important to give a comment field to have people explain why they don't want to give a telephone number, for example. So sometimes I get stuck when people ask me for, or when web forums ask me for a phone number only. Well, likewise for the do not reply. Lots of emails or chat forums that you fill out, they reply back to you. give you a do not reply option. And if you then want to change something or have a reaction, you have to go through the form again, because there's no other option for me to get in touch. So that's kind of tedious. Well, this is something that I really hate. The obligatory form, the web form with the telephone number, where I can't get out of it because I know they will call me. It's happened too many times. And then it looks like this. This is a screenshot from my phone. I was called this 1 week, I've been called a huge number of times by this same number. If you ask for a telephone number, be sure that there is a WhatsApp service behind it or a text service, and not just contact by phone. Fortunately, the World Health Organization have changed their stance on disability. So they used to call it a personal health condition, but it's changed into mismatched human interactions. And I have one quote from one of my colleagues that fits perfectly. It says, "I don't have a disability. Society imposes a disability upon me. The way I go through life is fine, but other people, like services, all kinds of, or websites, all kinds of other provisions pose boundaries for me." And then we get to the design process. So my assumption here is that most of you who are watching me are designers. So you must know about design thinking. So we have this process, right, that starts with, that has a couple of phases. So what we do is we identify a problem and we think about a solution for that problem. So design thinking has this loop. First, empathize, then define, ideate, prototype, and test. Design thinking is a system that's built on gaps that we want to fill. So gaps that you can't reach. So empathize for me is something that just gives me the shivers, because if you do that, then you try to do, what you try to do is fill those gaps from your own perspective. Lots of time, there's often not time to find people to be participants in the process. So what we do is we design for the average user and not for specific people, for example. So that is something that doesn't sit well with me. If you talk about empathizing, can you really empathize with the blind people? Can you really, have you done this? You know, if you try to, work as a blind person on a keyboard for an afternoon, or can you really understand what people are going through on a day-to-day basis? Do you feel the stress someone feels when something is not accessible? I understand that empathy is important for many different perspectives, but one person's experience of not being able to hear for one afternoon is not the same as my experience of not being able to hear for my entire life. So these experiences, I'm not sure, these perspectives, I'm not sure if we can understand every perspective from every person always. Which leads me to the following. Talk to us, interact with us. And I know it's very scary for a lot of people, I'll try to empathize because I think I can. I will close my eyes for an afternoon. I will wear a headset for a day, but I'd rather have you come up to me and ask me a question because it gives me an opportunity to tell you my story, and it also gives you an opportunity to interact with my life. So I would say learn from people around you, learn from people who have experienced exclusion. Those users are the experts, not you. So just ask us, but even better, ask with us. So come with your design and ask me and someone else and other people, is this working for you? And think about your biases. Ask, question your biases. Even better is design with us. It is very difficult, and it's very rare to find organizations that have people co-created or co-designing. Lots of times people are asked to give their opinion and then go home again. So what the idea is, we want to be accessible for people while it's not been asked, but be inclusive, have people participate in the design process. I see often that people are asked to participate as an external expert to give some input, but are not paid, for example, are just thanked and then go their way again. Also, lots of people with disabilities don't have a job. So this is a win-win situation. You can get different perspectives. And the more different perspectives, the better your design will be, the better the outcome will be. So I used to call this designing for the deaf, but and everyone actually, but I made a little bit of a mistake here, and I meant to say designing with the deaf. But it's not necessarily the deaf, it's just designing with people, with everyone, really. So I keep changing this title. It's a human right to be heard, but even better, not heard, but included. So let's just sit together and think about our solutions. I'm nearly finished with my presentation, but I wanted to show you a clip. There is no sound, unfortunately, but there are subtitles. So I think it's accessible. Here we go. Yeah, okay. So these are very cute boys, American boys. They're innovative, they're excited, and they want to make the world barrier-free. But unfortunately, this video, yeah, it irks me because they use, not really good words, deaf and mute, words that we've not used since the 60s. They're very old words, and they talk about the disabled community. I don't see myself as being disabled. So, and it only works one way. So you can sign and then something speaks, but how do you talk back then? I mean, communication is both sides. So it's a two-way street. So that doesn't work. And also this thing for the whole world doesn't work because not the whole world signs ASL, American Sign Language. My sign language is not the same as what these boys are signing, and also facial expressions I mentioned are necessary. Body movement are necessary. I don't sign like a robot. That would not be possible at all. But every year, one of these initiatives pops up, assistive technology. But please, it doesn't work. If it worked, why would I not be standing here with these gloves on? So the issue is that people design something, their own design, based on their own idea, on their own knowledge of the world, of their own framework. So we as designers aim to solve problems, and we want to change lives and better lives. But the issue is, if you use your own skills as a baseline, then it might be good for someone, but it's not good for everyone. So be aware of your own ability bias. And don't assume and empathize, but please make use of co-designs rather than, I'd rather have that than be a persona that something is based on. So yeah, create together. So design for people. If you design for people and not with people, that can lead to exclusion. So this is my talk, and I just wanted to end with this quote from James Charlton: "Nothing about us without us." Thank you.
Thank you, Mari. Amazing presentation. I learned a lot. I hope Christoph as well. We have a couple of questions on the Q&A, but before that, we prepare some small pool just to understand better the small crowd. We have almost 60 people on the webinar. So just to understand who you are, what you're doing. Are you on your during design work, are you design with disability in your mind? So Łukasz can kick off the pool, and then go quickly to the Q&A.
Okay, so the pool is live.
Shall I close my presentation? Does that work?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So maybe we can jump to the questions. There are many.
Okay, allow me to end pool now.
Just to let you know, I'm really sorry, but I didn't expect international viewers. So I signed Dutch Sign Language. So I know someone from America. I just saw that someone from America is there. I hope they were able to follow what I was signing.
Yeah, I think majority of the crowd here are designers in their profession. And I don't know, is it good stats or bad stats? That's like 34%, 10 people. Designers keep in mind that their accessibility during their projects. I think this is space for improvement, as they call it in English. But even in our company, in our studio, we are still learning how to do it, how to design accessibility in mind, if I can play that. Questions? Yeah.
So we have a number of questions in the Q&A section. Could someone address them?
Sure. So I will go from the top. Yeah. So you mentioned deaf culture. If it's necessary, not a very inclusive culture, I'm curious if there is any jokes, slang, or something that is difficult or impossible to translate outside of the deaf culture.
Yeah, sure. So there is deaf humor, for example, and if you explain it to hearing people, they just don't understand. I mean, every language, I think maybe even for Polish, for example, that for sure there are cultural related jokes, and people from Poland will not understand jokes from the Netherlands and vice versa. The same goes for jokes within the deaf community. I could try to translate something people have tried, but it's just not the same. They're so connected to the culture that the people are bound to, that yeah, sometimes it's just not translatable. Oh, that's true.
Thank you for the answer. There is a question about the automatically transcription. We kind of addressed that during the presentation. I know there is one Polish startup that was trying to do this. There are more and more services around providing transcription. In Poland, it's migam.pl. People can use it, and more public services using it. So they are more accessible. The second question is about the new wave of sign language avatars that are being developed with using artificial intelligence. So how do you feel about that?
I think those are two questions that have the same scope, I suppose. When talking about writing down a sign language, that's difficult, because even if you could, then the other way around, from writing to signing, would be very difficult. If you had AI like Avatar, that could be okay for signing some signs, but complete sentences that need much more movement. And it's very difficult to find those bits of in the sentence where you have to add extra movement. So for example, I am going home. I would say you can string those signs together. I am going home, but that's not a sentence. Those are just strings of signs. So there's movement between two signs that is really difficult to make. And also, yeah, you also have human touch anyway, you need that. So AI in the future might be possible, even when it gets better, like Google Translate, for example, but still it will always need a human touch. It will need eye contact. It will need facial expressions and all these things. So just fully accessible, I think that will still need a lot of time before we can reach that goal. But I won't say it's impossible, but it will take a long time.
Really point. There's another question. I think two questions that I can mix because as a designer that are constantly challenging by aesthetics and usability. Thank you. How do you include the design, kind of the best practices? That's I want to put these two questions together. So how do you include the way? I lost myself in these questions. It's kind of too many words. Sorry. One more attempt. I'm just gonna read it through. How do you include accessibility into the design in the way that blends cohesivity into the product design? So mixing usability and also aesthetics.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Many people think that accessibility is very boring, and very dry, but that doesn't have to be that way. I just want to show that it can be accessible for all and beautiful. It depends on how accessible you want to be. The W3C, the World Web codes, right? The WCAG has a checklist. You have all kinds of levels, like from A to 2A to AAA. And if you want to have the AAA status, then you would have to fully sign everything. Would be very expensive. And what is then your target group? What is your audience? Do you design, if you design for deaf people alone, yeah, then that's what you need to do. That takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money. But on the other hand, if you go to an AA status and you have subtitles, for example, and a transcript, and if you want to reach deaf people, then you would have to add signed content as well. And then, yeah, as what I said about language, check the level. Do people understand? But then secondly, accessibility can be very beautiful. It doesn't have to be boring at all. And yeah, if you talk about best practices, there's so many initiatives now because of the pandemic, for example, there's more accessibility in signed content. There are many videos right now that are signed by deaf people and deaf interpreters as well. And the more diversity in your team, the better the design will be, I would say, in general.
Definitely, diversity in the company it helps, and we can see it in the many studies that diverse companies create better products and they have bigger success rate on the market. There's a question from Aiden. I think it's from the developer coder side. How developers could make digital products more inclusive?
Yeah, make their semantic code fully accessible. And test automatic testing, that can help a lot, but also a bigger audit, for example, alt texts, descriptions. There are also deaf and blind people that rely on alt texts as well. Good semantic structure by which the website is readable. So the WCAG guidelines, they have good checklists. If you want to be fully accessible, just check those.
Thank you. We have the question from Sharon. What is the best way to describe background sound in the video? And what is most useful in this case?
Yeah, that's a good question. The BBC has a very good way to do that. So accessible captions. What they do is they check which sound have an impact on the situation. So if it's a scary movie or a scary scene and footsteps are important, then the footsteps are put in the captions. But it's depending on the situation. I see it on Netflix a bit more these days. There's a series that is not, I mean, not necessarily my taste, but the captions are really good. It's about African kitchen in North America. I will put it, I can put it in the chat. High on the Hog is what it's called. So influences of the American kitchen of the African kitchen in America. So I was looking at the captions and I was like, oh wow, this is very interesting. Lots of emotions are being conveyed. It's very good to see how they went about that in that particular program.
Yeah, I think there's more best practices on the market. I know Adobe a great document how to prepare, how to design in a more accessible. There is another question, but a compliment about nice tattoos on your hand.
Yes, thanks. Thank you. Was it's something from my youth.
There's a question from Daniela. Is for you to find people who know the sign language on your life.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, so deafness is like a hidden, situation. Other disabilities are easy to spot, but if people are deaf, you can only see it when they start to sign. Yeah, it depends. I mean, we have our own community, we have our own parties, Facebook pages, friends, and there are also famous deaf people within the community. Vloggers, for example, we have those all over the world. Online is awesome. It's really easy to find deaf people there. And it helps you when you travel, and you can get in touch with lots of people all over the world.
Thank you. We have a question from Dominica, and I think we are slowly till the end. Which brands or organizations do you think are the pioneers in the terms of accessible design?
That's a good question. I only know the big companies, Microsoft, Google. It also depends per country, I would say, because regulations are different. So in the UK and in the United States, there are disability acts, and there is law on exclusion. In Europe, it's a bit different. They're catching up right now. So diversity and inclusion are very hot topics these days. Black Lives Matter, for example, also, but also COVID has done a lot for the deaf community. But I think, diversity means everything. People of color, women, but also people with disabilities.
Yeah.
And I think we're all a little bit afraid of tokenism, maybe, when you think, okay, we're going to make something accessible. And so it might be a bit difficult, but I think do things together. And it's hard. I mean, yeah, but yeah, work towards equal opportunity. And we still have a long way to go, for sure.
Absolutely. I think Microsoft is doing a lot in this topic, as well as Google. I've been in many Microsoft conferences with the live caption prepare live. Of course, this technology still have to be improved, but it's amazing what they can do already. I think that's the end of the Q&A session. Thank you very much for all the questions. Thank you, Mary, for answering them.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was super interesting, super inspiring. I think we now are so much more aware of inclusive design. Yeah. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us.
We can say thank you, Yvonne, for interpreting.
You can find me on Twitter, just so you know. If you want to get in touch, you can find me there. So I see that now coming up in the chat, so just to let you know.
Definitely. This presentation was recorded. We're going to post it
on our social media channels. So follow us on our social media, follow Mari on Twitter.
Great.
And yeah, have a great afternoon, evening. See you next time.
Take care, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.